quiet quitting was seen as this big disruption and something that we made a really big deal out of in the past couple of years. But it was only ever as big of a deal as you made it to your team. It sounds like I'm brushing it off, but we're going to dive into that, as well as dive into why I personally won't ever quiet quit. So keeping everything simple, let's dive right in. Welcome back to the Keeping Everything Simple podcast. I'm your host and fellow student, Michael Klukas, and on this show, we boil down complicated topics into simple, actionable tips. So, like I said, quiet quitting was seen as this kind of big disruption where there was a lot of concern from employers, upper management of, well, if my team doesn't go above and beyond, what are we going to do? How are we going to know who to promote? How are we going to know how productive everyone's being? And that was a big question. However, there's a lot of different angles to look at quiet quitting. And so, because I never actually laid this out before, we're going to jump into the first segment of the Keeping Everything Simple podcast. And that is going to be just the complications, because we're trying to boil those down. And the first part is, in case you missed it for the last few years, here's what quiet quitting essentially is described as. It's like acting your wage, setting kind of these work-life boundaries and focusing on balance and not going above and beyond what is in your job description. And from the outset, it may seem like that's okay, kind of counterintuitive. It's the anti-hustle idea, the anti-hustle mindset that has become a lot more prevalent also in the past couple of years. But the thing is, you have to really see it from the angle of leadership and see it from the angle of the team members and the employees. Because when you have people setting proper work boundaries, that means they are being very conscious of how work is playing a role in their life. That means they are going to likely not burn out in the long run because they are setting good boundaries between what is good for them to do and what is not good for them to do. And that should be seen as a positive. And then you have the other piece of the puzzle here where in terms of leadership, it may feel a little bit harder than if you have these crunch time projects that are either the norm or something that comes every once in a blue moon. It may feel a bit harder if you know that you can't have a team member come in and stay late because maybe that's not something they're able to do. It's not something they want to do. And ultimately, it's just not a good mixture when you have two competing needs here. You have someone who wants to have a good semblance of balance, and you want people who want consistent and improving results. But that's also where the idea for acting your wage comes in, where it's like, well, why would I go above and beyond my job title? Why would I go above and beyond my pay grade? And this is something that I touched in on my last episode, which I can recommend you go check that one out too. It's just the idea of like long-term thinking and what that means for us and what that means for employees who want to be a bit more mindful about where they're going, what we want in the future, and how the present day is going to help us do that. Because if someone's acting their wage, that means there is some misalignment of interest. That means that their needs, their wants aren't quite being met for where they want to go in the future. And that's something that needs to be recognized, because that also means that the person who hired them wasn't able to properly incentivize and get that clarified during that process. So that fault does lay with the company and with leadership, because you have to know what you are hiring for, and you have to make it clear what someone is getting into. There's no more of the whole, and this is a little personal gripe here, there's no more of the, we are our family here, everyone takes care of each other, it's a fast-paced environment. You have to kind of be upfront about these things. Well, if it's a fast-paced environment, what's the reason? Is it just the field? Like in journalism, if you're a field journalist, I can see it being a fast-paced environment. You got deadlines to hit, you got stories to find, you got research to do. There's a lot of different things going on all at once. But if you're someone in accounting, there may be considerably less to do. Not that there's a lack of work, but the way in which the work is being produced and created may not be as spur of the moment, if that makes sense. But that's where that balance needs to come in, because if you have, again, companies looking at people setting these boundaries, looking and working within their job description, then you have to realize that that's something that you guys set and they are now meeting. And as long as those needs are being met for the company, that shouldn't technically be a problem. But again, the complication becomes that the employee still needs to have their own future needs met and their own prospects improved for what promotions might look like, what perks might be, what work might look like for them in the future. But that's where the changes of hybrid work and work from home really came into play as well, because managers got a lot more uptight and companies got a lot more uptight even about kind of just butts in chairs. It is, hey, you're here, you're being productive. Like, that was generally and still can be generally seen as a rule of productivity. You'll see so many articles. Actually, let me see here. If you are watching this on YouTube with us, one thing I'm going to do, let me pull up articles about this, because like I said, managers and companies see it kind of as, if you're butts in the chair, you are putting in time in the office, your productivity must be high. But the other piece of the puzzle here is the fact that you have so many different articles that say, well, hey, remote work isn't going away, and executives should know this, and they do. And we have an article from Fortune here that remote work is supposedly killing productivity, experts and CEO says, except it's just surged the most in nearly 3 years. And remote workers have no attachment, passion, or creativity, says the L'Oreal Boston CEO. But that, again, becomes a matter of the culture being built from the top down. And that's something you have to understand, that it starts with the company, it starts with leadership. And Yahoo Finance, is productivity paranoia spreading? Only 24% of employees trust coworkers to get work done from home. There's just so much doubt around what productivity means, where it looks different, again, industry to industry. That's why there's this kind of no one size fits all. But having a general metric of you are here, your butt is in a chair, isn't really the best one to go off of. Because I can say it like this, and I remember this being a joke from, I believe it was the 1 Minute Manager. If you run around with a bunch of papers in your hands, your hair all messed up, talking on the phone really quickly, you will be seen as a very, very productive team member. And that is not what companies want. That's not what we should want for ourselves, to just kind of coast through the day. But that's where, again, the transition that people are trying to push for, to get back to an old norm of everyone has to be in office, everyone has to be here because it's the only way we can see if you're being productive, doesn't take into account how much there's benefits to allowing this flexibility and how much people can get done without micromanagement. And though the pendulum here does swing back and forth pretty widely for productivity, for people who are actively engaged and people who are quiet quitting, because going above and beyond for promotions still exists. Like, people will still do it if they're playing the game right. And that's something that we have to really consider this as, is a sort of game. But even though that pendulum can swing far one way, to be like, all right, that still exists, people will still go above and beyond, it does swing the other way too. And we have to be okay with allowing people to say, I want to actually stick in my role. I'm comfortable right here, and I don't have an urge and a need to get higher up. And that's not quiet quitting. That is setting an expectation for themselves that they're okay with. And that's something I just wanted to clarify in terms of the complications here. But comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. Do you ever feel like your productivity is related just to how much you've been seen around the office, or that's ever been a metric that you've been judged by? Let me know your thoughts down below. Real quick, if you're enjoying this on YouTube, make sure that you do like and subscribe to the podcast. It helps me out so much. If you're listening to us on a podcast app, give us a rating and a follow. That will stoke my ego for the day, but it also helps share the show with other people just like you. All right, let's dive back in. diving into the next segment of the show, it's down to the conflicts of quiet quitting and what they actually present. If you are someone who is quiet quitting actively and acting your wage and just working to the job description, that's not bad, and I want to emphasize that, but there are drawbacks to it. That's why I said there's a pendulum to this, where if you're not actively engaging and stepping out a bit more here or there, you are less likely to get promoted. And if that's one of your goals, it's something that you have to be aware of is being hindered by that act. And that's, again, the perspective from a team member and from leadership, because leaders want to have people that they know will go above and beyond, people that have weathered storms with them, they've gone through highs and gone through lows, and they want people that are able to go through that, still perform well, and at times exceed expectations. Whereas if you have someone who only does the bare minimum, and if they still go through the same highs and lows but only ever produce the same amount of results, if not less at times, then they are going to be seen as a less likely candidate. And that's why I said this is all a type of game. You have to understand what game you're playing. If you're playing the game of experience and you just want to learn as much as possible, then it makes sense if you're just trying to take in everything. But if you're trying to play the game of leveling up and getting up that ladder faster, then it's not really an option to essentially quiet quit, but you can be very intentional about how you spend the time and what you do. And that's why there is something to be said, the pros about being involved more. You get a better understanding that much faster. This means you can become an expert, you can become a lot more knowledgeable so much more quickly because you are seeking answers, you are diving in head first, you are essentially getting thrown in the deep end multiple times and learning to swim. That does not work for everybody, and that is okay if it does not work for you. It's just one of the pros that I can think of. But then you also have more opportunities to shift your work to what matters. And this is where I think the biggest benefit comes in is if you are trying to get to a new department, you are trying to do a lateral shift from one team to another because the other team's work aligns more closely with passions of yours, interests of yours. It's easy to say, all right, cool, we have a star player over here, someone who does great work, who goes above and beyond at times when we need them to, but doesn't feel the need to do it all the time. They're going to be a more likely candidate to get their request approved when they ask to move to a new team. And this doesn't work the same way in every single company. That's something that, again, I will acknowledge. Some companies just say, hey, apply for the job, and if you get the job, great. But it's something that, again, you have to understand. If you are being seen as one of those candidates, it's going to be so much easier to be like, all right, cool, this person we know does good work over here. They're going to be a very great internal hire. And because it goes back to what I said, it's not always what you know, who you know will still play a huge factor in your company and in your career success. And there is satisfaction, a lot of satisfaction that can be found in doing a job well done. And that's, again, one of the pros of being involved more is the fact that you can say, I know that I did really well. I know that I created a lot of change, a lot of effort went into this, and I can see my work, and I'm proud of that. There is satisfaction in that, and that can be found in going the extra mile when it counts most for you. And one of the other conflicts here is that those who micromanage and that is their style, which is not one that I recommend by any means whatsoever, they will feel entitled to knowing how you spend your time, which will of course lead to conflict because it can be the example of camera on meetings, which I have not yet worked a remote and hybrid job, but I know very well how frustrating those are from just everyone else's experience. To have to always say, all right, you have to turn your camera on so that way we can see your eyes zoned in, that you aren't looking somewhere else, doing something else. And so it was the same thing with when we switched to remote schooling during the pandemic, and there was the detection of, are you turning your eyes away from the screen? A lot harder to really focus on, but then companies having this kind of same mentality of like, we have to make sure that you are looking at your computer, you aren't getting up, and kind of trying to take that butt in the chair philosophy and move it to people who are working from home or with a hybrid structure. And then the problem here that becomes, you have people like Cal Newport who will show in their findings and in their research and in their studies that, hey, there is times in which knowledge work jobs where you can actually do remote and hybrid work, you still have this influx of communication and emails where not all the work is going to be needle moving work. You will spend up to like 7 hours just dealing with communication and email and Slack messages, and it's going to be so much harder to get the meaningful work done. And so that's when people who are micromanagers, when they feel entitled to your time, they're going to cause so much more headache because it's going to be less of the important work getting done and more of just, I need to show that I'm looking busy, which means sending them little updates here and there, which is just not something I recommend. And that's where the complication comes in. And companies and leadership have to realize that. That's not the way to go. But that then takes us into simplified action. What are the resolutions here? What are the things that can really help this out? And even with the complications, this is why I personally don't quiet quit. There is a long-term goal I'm working towards in my career, and each job is a step towards that. Consider it a little Lego brick that's helping me build towards this final image and final creation that I really want. And what I'm currently doing now, current jobs I've had in the past, may not have been technical dream jobs, quote unquote, for me, but I am learning something important with each of them. And that's one of the things that we have to take away from the whole trend of quiet quitting and just people starting to really prioritize that work-life balance is figuring out long-term goals and long-term perspectives. We are much more logical about our long-term aspirations than we are in the present moment. That's something that's going to be so helpful for us to be able to say, hey, I want a lifestyle that allows me to go on vacation, to see my friends and family, to invest in my hobbies and interests, to have passion projects, and to have work that feels meaningful, and to have work that I enjoy. And that's just a broad value-based idea as opposed to getting into the nitty-gritty details of like, what's a day in your life going to look like and a long-term aspect here. But that's something that we have to really focus on, especially teams, leaders, and companies that are hiring people and worried about quiet quitting potential, or someone that's going to set a work boundary that they're holding on to because there is a long-term goal here. That's why I personally don't quiet quit, because I know what I'm working towards. I have an ideal that I want, and that involves knowledge work, that involves me being able to stay home in the future with a future family at times, to not have to work so hard I burn out, but to be able to provide. And it's just all these different pieces of the puzzle that create this image of the life I want. And that's the long-term goals that help maintain that motivation and that drive for myself today, because I know my future self is going to thank me for that. And then that moves me into the next piece, is I'm creating my own opportunities. And that's something else that companies have to do, is create opportunities as well for their team members. And then also create an environment in which finding opportunities is a lot more appreciated. So I asked my boss at Hire, what would a fantastic job look like in 6 months? If I was doing everything 100%, if I was really going above and beyond, if I was able to provide a lot of value to the team, what would that look like in 6 months? And this again was future looking. It was taking a long-term projection here, technically long-term, and seeing how to work backwards from that. Because it's then less of me taking a shot in the dark of what am I going to do? How am I going to prove my worth and value? It's instead, oh, she told me exactly what to do. Fantastic. I can now play the game in a way that allows me to find balance and still meet the markers that she had laid out for me. And that is how companies should operate. And this is where there has to be initiative still, though. Team members have to ask, what would a fantastic job look like? Companies have to know what a fantastic job would look like. So that way, no one's just kind of walking around aimlessly and thinking, okay, if I do this, this might work, as opposed to knowing, okay, if I do this project, if I help out here and learn how to do this, I know that's what they required from me to be doing a great job. I can do that. And that means I can actually say no to some other things that are less important, that aren't going to move that needle forward. And that's part of the game there. That's part of the game of creating and finding opportunities. And then the last part here is that in quiet quitting, I simply believe that that is a need that's not being met, that forms the boundaries and limitations that we have and that companies end up seeing. For myself, I am aware of what is and isn't working for myself and what I can actually best do to address them. That's stuff that's within my control. And if it doesn't serve me and the larger goal and larger pictures, it all comes down to my perspective of, do I need to invest time in that now, or can I push it off a little bit and invest time in that later? And that's something that we should be aiming towards as individuals, is that kind of intentionality, that mindfulness of, okay, what do I need? How am I going to make this happen? But at the same time, what boundaries need to be set so I can do good work? What boundaries should I have in place so I'm not feeling burnt out and uninspired and unmotivated? And that's why I encourage you to then think about what opportunities you have and how you are able to use them to create this intentional action that you can take at work, so that way you don't feel like you are just being pulled along by some unknown force, coasting through the job, coasting through the day. But the again becomes why I won't quiet quit, is it still is motivated by the larger aspect and what I want to do rather than what I have to do today. That's why ultimately for me, around quiet quitting, it comes down to me wanting to focus on slow and productive productivity. Yes, I just kind of stole Cal Newport's title there. Sorry. And having this long-term goal of building towards that future, as well as building good relationships with coworkers and with my boss, so I know what game to play. And I believe that for those of us who feel we don't have a choice, it's important that we do drill down into what needs of ours aren't being met, what is making us feel like we have to quiet quit to protect our boundaries, because then that means something is not being met, something has not been articulated, or if it has been, why isn't it being addressed? That's something that you have to really consider and really get honest with yourself about. And ask yourself as well then, what is within my control to change within the next 1 to 3 months, because we have to work up these little changes to build the environment within reason. And I don't mean jumping ship and switching jobs all of a sudden, but I do mean that we can rearrange our current roles to be more in alignment with who we are and what we want to do. So that's my encouragement to you guys. Comment down below, what is something that you believe that you can control right now in the next 1 to 3 months that will make your job a little bit better and quiet quitting a little less necessary. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube still, make sure that you also leave us a like and subscribe while you are down there. It helps the show out so much, and I greatly appreciate it. If you listen to us on a podcast app, then make sure that you leave us a rating, follow us. I recommend a 5-star rating. But I hope you have an amazing day, you amazing people. Keep everything simple. Go out there and do great things. I'll see you next time.